Hello everyone, this is Brooke, DeFi analyst from TID Research. Next, we can probably look at the DEX sector. So the competition landscape for DEX sector is a little bit more straightforward than the perp DEX. So for EVM ecosystem, the clear winner of DEX sector within 2025 is probably Pancakeswap and Uniswap. And for Solana, it's most likely Humidify. So for EVM, we can see that the Uniswap V3 volume has been pretty solid throughout most of 2025. And for the Uniswap V4, the volume is also picking up pretty stably, and the market share is also pretty robust throughout most of 2025. So it shows that from early 2025, Uniswap's strategies to incentivize the launch of Unichain and Uniswap V4 with the Uni token as an incentive. And then later on, in the late second half of 2025, they rolled out the unification proposal and to initiate the buyback of the Uni token work perfectly to not only protect the market share of the Uniswap V3, but also increase the market share of Uniswap V4. And then overall, for the tokens, for the protocols they launched throughout 2025, who finished their TGE, most of them still choose Uniswap as one of their biggest liquidity hub to bootstrap the liquidity. So overall, Uniswap still serve the role as the most important infrastructure to provide liquidity throughout the DeFi market. On top of that, within the EVM ecosystem, Pancakeswap is also outperforming the peers throughout 2025. And that has something to do with the Binance Alpha we just talked about. So Binance Alpha overall is a launchpad where protocol can launch token on the Binance UI. It's different from Binance Spot or Binance Perps. For Binance Alpha, the online liquidity will be on Pancakeswap. So it means that the online liquidity is still on Uniswap. However, Binance Alpha serves to allow the Binance user to directly through the Pancakeswap liquidity pools. Therefore, the whole experience becomes much more convenient. On top of that, it's also using their resources to incentivize this kind of activity. For example, for all the protocol that like to Binance Alpha, they have to give out 1 to 3% of the airdrop to the users. On top of that, if you trade through Binance Alpha and then interact with all this liquidity on Pancakeswap, you're able to earn the Binance Alpha points, and these points will also later be translated into the future airdrop. Throughout the 2025, Binance Alpha was pretty popular, and therefore Pancakeswap also benefited a lot from it. So you can see that Binance Alpha first launched in April, and that is also when the volume started picking up. And even though in the second half of the 2025, people are less hype about Binance Alpha, overall the volume of Pancakeswap are still pretty decent compared to the beginning of 2025. As for the other protocol within the EVM ecosystem, so CurveDex, even though struggling during the middle of the 2025, but near the Q3 and also the Q4 of the 2025, after the launch of Yo Basis, Curve managed to pick up some of its volume, and then right now a lot of volume on Curve is actually contributed by Yo Basis. So the launch of Yo Basis basically helped Curve to protect its volume, even though the market share is still smaller than the beginning of 2024 for Fui. So even though their market share is not very significant, but right now Fui has managed to find its niche market, which is the correlated pairs swapping. So after the launch of Smart Depth and Smart Collateral, the port for correlated pair that have been routed through Fui has been climbing, because more and more users prefer, for example, if you want to run the fund ETH, they prefer to lend to LP on Fui, because when they LP on Fui, they can not only earn the lending APY, but they can also earn the LP APY. And from time to time, there is also reward on top. And if you go to, for example, KyberSwap or Odos, look at this kind of aggregator, and then if you try to execute a correlated pair swap, for example, like USDC to USDT or RSA ETH to ETH, it's very likely that you'll see that over 50% of the order will be routed through Fui. So even though Fui market share is not very significant, however, their market share has been pretty solid, because right now they're the leader in this correlated pairs swapping route. And for other DEX, such as like Aerodrome, you can see that even though their market share is not climbing, it's also holding up, and that has something to do with the launch of their ignition program. So similar to Uniswap, they understand that the competition is fierce, so therefore they launched the ignition program to use the Aerodrome to incentivize the swapping through the Aerodrome. So therefore, even though it's not growing, but they are still able to protect their market share. So that's for the EVM ecosystem. And for the Solana ecosystem, the competition is even more intense. In the beginning of 2025, we can see that the DEX such as like Orca or Raydium were doing very good. And that's coincided with the period where people were most hyped about the meme. So the traditional such as Orca or like Raydium, they benefited a lot from this kind of trend. However, later on, coin was dying down, and then Solana was struggling, and therefore you can see that Orca and the Raydium market share keep on dropping. However, there's also a new player coming to the game. That is the Humidify. So you can see that in the second half, the trading volume has been growing like very stably, and right now it's even larger than the Raydium and Orca combined. And that is because the narrative on Solana is also shifting throughout the whole 2025 as well. At the very beginning of the year, it was more about speculation, but in the second half of 2025, it's more about DeFi. It's more about yield-bearing stable. It's more about looping and leverage. And Humidify is doing a better job as a liquidity layer to process these kind of swaps compared to Orca or Raydium, which is more of an all-purpose. So more and more trading volume right now are being routed through Humidify, and then Humidify is going pretty well together with this growing trend of DeFi on Solana market, and that helped to explain why the market share has been climbing.